What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. It's no secret that Fizz is probably one of the more hated champions in League of Legends, and he's especially prevalent now given his rise in popularity and power in the current meta. But Season 6 is the season of champion reworks, and I'm interested to see whether or not Fizz will actually get a rework in the future, and more specifically if he'll get new abilities. He's certainly a case of a champion that has a lot of things that goes against Riot's design philosophies, and a couple of mechanics that do kind of qualify as unhealthy design. But that said, Fizz is still an interesting champion and is one of the more unique takes on the assassin playstyle that has had a lot of cool and alternate playstyles be popular as well. And if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, hit that dislike. Now, just before this conversation starts, we have to talk about what would make a champion qualify for a rework. And I'm talking a lot more specifically about the new game design and kit part of a rework where he gets new abilities and his abilities change significantly, not the kind of rework that's just like a visual upgrade and a lore revamp and all that stuff. And for that other kind of rework, which is the visual upgrade and the lore revamp and all that stuff, Fizz probably doesn't qualify as much as a lot of the other champions, so it's not really a key topic that I want to touch on in this video. Anyway, when it comes to reworking a champion's gameplay and doing things like giving them new abilities, new mechanics, and a rehashed gameplay design in general, the biggest thing that will contribute to a champion needing a revamp in that category, to put it simply, is if they have problems in the design of their gameplay that Riot views as significant. As to whether or not Fizz falls under that category, I'm not entirely sure. Now I know there's a lot of people out there who really don't like Fizz, so to those people, I do actually want to say that Fizz's gameplay design might be a little bit more reasonable than you think, so hear me out. So let's start breaking down Fizz in a spot where most people probably take the biggest issue with him, which is of course his playful trickster, his E. This Fizz ability is pretty notorious because the mechanics involved with it typically make it something that many would view as being frustrating to play against. From the invulnerability, wave clear, slow effect, and a high amount of damage and versatility, it's hard to make a case for such an ability, and for a really long time I actually too thought that this ability was, well, pretty dumb, and I'm not the biggest fan of playing against Fizz. But after messing around a bit more with him as a champion and talking to some champion designers about Fizz, I actually think that his playful trickster is, I'm not gonna say well designed, but it's actually very interesting, and I don't think the ability is a problem at all. And even if Fizz does get a rework, it's likely that this ability could remain unchanged. And although I can't deny that this is definitely a frustrating ability to play against, the fact that it's frustrating to face kind of does get complemented by the idea that it's fun to play with and use, and it's a reasonable way to give him the outplay potential that his kit needs to have as an assassin. And it might be a bit weird to think about, but the reason why Fizz's E is at least kind of balanced, at least from a design standpoint, is actually because of the very nature of it being overloaded. Because Fizz has so much of his overall power put into his playful trickster, that actually makes the ability a lot more fair. And the reason why that is because it forces Fizz to have to choose and make an active decision when using the ability. If he uses it as a part of his damage combo, then suddenly he has no escape, since he used it aggressively, and if he uses it as an escape, then he's doing a lot less damage in that situation. And since it also gives him wave clear, it means that he'll be using it in lane somewhat often, which does leave him with windows of opportunities to be vulnerable to ganks and engages. And it's those trade-offs that Fizz has to decide between when using playful trickster that makes this ability reasonable design. Fizz will, at least in theory, never have a super high burst combo and an escape in a given situation because of the mechanics of his E, and you'll never have wave clear and an escape, and you know, just two of the things that you could get from his E, you get the idea. However, that is kind of just on paper, because the thing is that if Fizz gets super fed and he no longer needs the damage from playful trickster to kill his target, then the ability does become a lot less fair, since the trade-offs all of a sudden become a lot less meaningful. But it is still important for him to have some kind of outplay potential, as that is a really core element of what makes an assassin work, and it's also a part of why assassins snowball like crazy. So in the sense that because he's supposed to be an assassin, this ability is arguably fair to have on his kit. It's definitely frustrating to play against a lot of the time, don't get me wrong, but it's actually some of the other problems with the design of his kit that make this ability and his kit overall potentially worse than it is on paper. Whether or not you think Playful Trickster is poorly designed or not, there are other more significant problems worth bringing up with Fizz. First off, we have to talk about his passive. Now, this ability might not be poorly designed in the sense that it doesn't really ever cause any unhealthy patterns of gameplay, but what it does suffer from is just a total lack of any interesting traits at all. This is probably one of the most lackluster and in some situations useless passives in the entire game, and a lot of the time it's kind of just bugged anyway. Whether you like or dislike Fizz, it's important to consider both sides of the story when discussing his design, and the passive is questionable as well, since it doesn't really do anything to contribute to his kit in any way. Half the time it might as well not even exist. Loads of champions in League have super cool passives that do lots of stuff and add in a lot of gameplay elements, and Fizz's passive does practically nothing, and it's a big reason that might make him due for a rework. A new passive could add a bit more excitement to his kit and give him a lot more depth as well, and with assassins, getting that depth is really important. Most assassins lack a lot of depth in general since their gameplay patterns often come down to just a simple thing of just, they kill their target or they don't. And Fizz is definitely no exception to that since his ultimate so heavily reinforces that idea, that by making his passive a completely different ability, it could make Fizz have a lot more complexity and depth, which would maybe be a good thing to give him in order to make him more fun to play, while also giving him more meaningful counterplay too. It's not really an ability that's poorly designed though, since its passive pretty much never contributes to any unhealthy gameplay patterns, it's just that it's an ability that has a lot of room for improvement, and is probably where Fizz could stand to benefit the most from if he actually did get a rework. So we have his passive as something that is kind of questionable, but what is definitely the biggest problem in his kit, and might honestly be one of the worst designed abilities in League of Legends I have to say, is actually Fizz's W. And the reason why I say it might be one of the worst actual designed abilities in League of Legends is because it conflicts so much with Riot's design philosophies. Riot has a lot of rules that they set and goals and ideas that they want to accomplish with champion design, and Seastone Trident, his W, actually does break a lot of those rules and directly conflicts in accomplishing those ideas. And this is because his W is probably the cookie cutter case of what is known as hidden power in a champion, which is something that Riot very much actively wants to avoid, and they have stated that time and time again. And when I say hidden power, it means something that is more powerful than it appears, making it difficult for enemies to see or respond to it. And the magic damage that takes over 3 seconds with his W is exactly that. It's unintuitive how much damage you might take from this ability, and it's ambiguous when you take a lot more damage than is apparent, because it feels like the game is kind of tricking you. It's like it's lying to you in a sense that it's so unclear how much damage you're actually taking from this ability. This is typically why there are a very small number of damage over time effects in League of Legends, and most of them have very clear effects or do a flat amount of damage because abilities should be clear cut. You know that, okay, I get hit by this and I take this amount of damage, or I get hit by that and then this happens. And it's really clear and obvious to you what happens, and it's communicated well, but this W ability is kind of the total opposite. The indicators on this ability should be much more obvious that you're actually taking damage from it. For example, when you face someone like a Darius, the bleed that you're taking has this massive indicator all over your head and it's totally in your face, and every single damage tick does the same amount of damage, but with Fizz that kind of clarity is just not there when it should be. Especially since it has missing HP scaling, the amount of times you can finish someone off with the passive ticks is quite frequent, and it's really frustrating to die to because it feels like you really should have lived when in fact you just took 8% of your missing health in the last few seconds right as you have escaped. Dying from variable damage numbers on a damage over time is not only frustrating, but more importantly, it's really confusing. And the missive HP scaling comboed with the lack of a clear visual indicator makes it ambiguous to play against, and it's just a bit too much hidden power tied into a single ability. And this ability, it's honestly not really that overpowered at all. I mean, it's okay. It's just that this idea of hidden power is something that Riot very actively tries to avoid, especially recently, and it's one of the biggest examples of something that is unhealthy design. So with all of that said, let's stop ranting about his W and bring it back to the main idea of whether or not this makes Fizz actually qualify for the need for a rework. At least the way I see it from a design perspective, we have one semi-relevant reason in his passive and one relatively significant reason in his W. But is that enough to make him worthy of getting a rework? Well, it's not entirely clear. One ability doesn't necessarily make the entire champion poorly designed and unhealthy, it just creates some situations in game that have that type of gameplay. But who knows, we've got the Assassin's rework coming later in this year probably, and maybe Fizz will be a part of that. So what do you think? Should Fizz get new abilities in the form of a rework? Leave a comment, subscribe if you want, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.